Welcome to the Flock and Hive podcast, a place for curious minds to explore all that makes life so weird and wonderful. And this week,
The average age of menopause is somewhere between 45 and 55. And if you think about that, the average life age expectancy for women now is about 83, 85. So we are living a big chunk of our lives postmenopausally. So a lot of what we'll talk about today, I think, is about future-proofing that time post-menopause. And I think that doesn't really get talked about enough.
We speak to Emma Bardwell about menopause and nutrition.
hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Flock and Hive podcast.
Hello.
Yes, welcome back. It's another juicy one. I know we say that all the time, but it's quite a timely one for us as well. We speak to Emma Bardwell, who is a leading menopause expert and a registered nutritionist. So there aren't many people who know much more than she does about this stuff.
What I really appreciate in this interview with Emma coming up is how she does call out certain fads and things, which is really important when we're presented with so much information, especially around something like menopause.
Mm. We're actually having a conversation about this now, way too late in the day, but thank goodness that we are, and thank goodness that it's finally being talked about in schools with younger people too. Hurrah!
Oh wow, yeah, I'm very grateful for that. That it's just it's there. Dive in. There is so much to learn. But yeah, being a woman's tough.
Being a woman's tough, but getting old is tough. Do you think you fear it? This getting old thing?
Have done my whole life.
Yeah, well, me too. But did you know, dear sister, that there's actually a word for that?
Could have guessed it, yes. Especially talking to you. Go on then, hit me.
Yes. Well, the word geraskophobia exists, and it is a lesser known term for the fear of growing old. So there is a word for it, and a lot of people have geraskophobia.
I mean, it kind of does what it says on the tin, doesn't it? Geras, I imagine, comes from sort of geriatric, that kind of
Yes, it
derivation.
does. But if you don't see it written down, you can also imagine it's a bit like Jurassic, like a
Yeah.
dinosaur as well. Either way, it's not a good thing, is it? Yeah.
Phobia of dinosaurs. Well, you know, don't my 8-year-old son started to call me a dinosaur. So I was like, thanks.
Oh, that's nice.
Mm,
Yeah.
he's experimenting with banter.
Oh, I love that. We've got a lot of sass going on in our tween girl house. So
Mm.
that's what that banter looks like over. It's just really sarcastic most of the time. But you could actually teach them this word, which is kind of like the opposite of geraskophobia, and that is senescence. And that is it's the process of aging and growing old, but it is with particular reference to a gradual accumulation of wisdom during your natural life cycle. So it's about getting older and wiser and the wisdom that comes with age. And that's why those little scrotes are actually a bit thick compared to us.
I don't know shit. That's a lovely word. It almost feels like, it's like serenity. Yeah, nice. And I do believe in it. And I feel like I know the important things, or I know what's more important nowadays than in my 20s, like the things I prioritized. Oh my God. So, yeah, go aging. Plus, it's a privilege to age, right?
I mean, that is the biggest, most important thing that we should remember. Getting old is a privilege. You're absolutely right. I am going to take that with me today.
But also knowing how to get the best out of aging, which is what this conversation is all about. It's just about knowing yourself, knowing that you're unique and there is no one answer to all this, hormonal stuff. So now is the time, late 30s, early 40s to get educated in it.
It totally is. And this is the lady who's going to help you do that. So, a very good place to start. This is a conversation that we had with Emma Bardwell. Emma Bardwell, it is so brilliant to have you on the Flock and Hive podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. It is a delight to see you and absolutely love talking about this subject. I can talk about it till the cows come home. So, yeah, really looking forward to getting stuck in.
Oh, I'm so glad about that because you are clearly very much in demand as one of the country's leading specialists in menopause and nutrition. And yeah, like where do we start with this massive, massive subject, apart from why the hell most of us still don't know much about it? Perhaps Perhaps it's with the difference between perimenopause and menopause?
Yeah, I think that is a great place to start. So I think really there's a lot of confusion around the jargon and the terminology around this. And I think actually it's better sometimes to think about it as perimenopause and postmenopause, because menopause is actually just one day. It's the day of your last period ever. And it's what we call a retrospective diagnosis. So we look backwards 12 months after not having a period, we look back and say that day of your last period was your menopause. Um, and then perimenopause is the time leading up to that final day. And I think for lots of women, it's the perimenopause years that are the most problematic, potentially, not for everyone. And we can delve into that. But I think that it's the perimenopause time that really discombobulates a lot of women and makes them feel it can be quite confronting. And if you're not prepared for it, I think women can really feel like they're kind of falling off a cliff. And then basically after your final period, after that, those 12 months of not having a period, we are what is called postmenopausal. The average age of menopause is so somewhere between 45 and 55. So if you think about that, the average life age expectancy for women now is about 83, 85. So we are living a big chunk of our lives postmenopausally. So a lot of what we'll talk about today, I think, is about future proofing that time post menopause. And I think that doesn't really get talked about enough.
Very good point. What this does make me wonder, though, is I've known a couple of people recently who have been told that they're in early menopause, like aged like 42. What does that mean? Because they're still having periods.
Yeah. So early menopause is between the ages of 40 and 45. It's much more common, I think, than people realize. I think because women drop through the net. I think probably because lots of GPs aren't really up to speed. Not all of them are. The training is still quite limited. It's an elective area when doctors are trained medically. And so for that reason, I think quite often women in that age bracket don't get the support and the kind of diagnosis that might potentially help them. And I think it's also important to recognize that 1 in 100 women under the age of 40 go through menopause, 1 in 1,000 under the age of 30, and 1 in 10,000 under the age of 20. So, when GPs tell you that you are too young to be menopausal, that's categorically not true. And my youngest client was actually 14. So we don't know why she went through it. It didn't run in her family. She had one menstrual cycle and then she was in full blown menopause at the age of 14, which is extremely rare, but it does happen. So I think it's worth, just having that in the back of your mind. And also, obviously, there is chemical and surgical menopause, which for I think lots of women in those categories, they feel like they get left out of the conversation, particularly on social media at the moment, because there's lots of talk about HRT and things like that. But for them, what we are going to talk about later today in terms of lifestyle and diet is all very, very relevant, and there are lots of options. There's lots of non-hormonal options, and we can discuss those generally later.
Yes. So chemical menopause
Yeah,
and
so
the other ones.
yeah,
Yeah.
chemical menopause is when it's usually as a result of radiotherapy or chemotherapy because of, I don't know, some kind of pelvic disorder. And it plunges women into menopause, quite often very abruptly. And so those menopause symptoms can feel very, very confronting.
Okay. Thank you. So let's talk about hormonal changes and how that happens over time. What is going on during this perimenopausal stage and then onto the menopausal stage?
Yeah. So essentially, what is happening from perimenopause is that our hormones are depleting. I'm talking about spontaneous menopause now. So, when you go through it because of age, not chemical or surgical menopause. But essentially, what's happening is your hormones are depleting, but they're not going down in a really nice, even, steady way. They are very much what we call like hormonal chaos. It's like this kind of roller coaster, which is why I think some women will feel absolutely fine at certain points in their cycle, or maybe even in the day. And then suddenly they'll kind of be plunged into these symptoms. And then, what happens is after this hormonal chaos, when you are postmenopausal, your hormones are much lower, but also, positively, much steadier. So you're not kind of at the mercy of these roller coaster emotions and symptoms.
Oh my goodness me. So, can we talk about the symptoms, the emotional ones, but also the physical ones?
Yeah, and before we do that, I think it's important to recognize that perimenopause, on average, it lasts about 5 to 7 years, but for some people, it can last up to 14 years. So it is very much a kind of transition. We now talk about it not as perimenopause, but as a menopause transition. And it kind of ebbs and flows, and the symptoms come and go, and they kind of change depending on where you are in that journey. And so I think for the at the very beginning of that transition, a lot of women won't pick up on what's happening. They will just put it down to stress or life, or living with teens, or younger kids, or divorce, or work worries. We're kind of dealing with a lot, aren't we, at this time of life? Um,
Yep.
so I think a lot of it goes unrecognized, but some of the early kind of symptoms, particularly that I see in women, are changes in sleep, and potentially changes in periods. But it isn't, I think lots of women think their periods are just going to stop, and that's the sign. Actually, it can be a lot more nuanced and a lot more kind of, oh, what's the word? I can't even think of the word. But yeah, brain fog. Brain fog is a big symptom. But it's a lot more. Oh, anyway, it's a lot more nuanced than that, and a lot less obvious sometimes. So changes in women will find that they just aren't sleeping so well. They might find that they are kind of experience the psychological symptoms. So particularly things like lack of confidence, lack of joy, lack of motivation, kind of lack of get up and go. And obviously that can be put down to lots of different things. And then I think that they kind of morph as you go through the journey. And the kind of poster symptoms, which are the vasomotor symptoms, which are things like hot flushes and night sweats, they tend to be more towards the end of that perimenopause time. And actually, they can cross over into postmenopause too. And I do have clients who are in their 60s and 70s, and they are still having hot flushes, unfortunately.
So, might that be a sign that actually you're towards the end of it then? So, if you're getting those and you're still in your early 40s and you're having a lot of night sweats and hot flashes.
I think potentially, I think what is clear from all of the research that is starting to come out, previously menopause has been under researched, underfunded, kind of under talked about, under recognized, under discussed. But I think what is coming out now that we are throwing more of a spotlight on it is that everybody goes through it very, very differently. Every woman's journey is incredibly unique. So it's really hard to say it will look like this. Don't worry, it will turn into this, because, yeah, like I say, everybody is very unique in the way that they experience it.
But it sounds like it's safe to say that if you're sort of approaching 44, 45, you're going to be having symptoms of it, and so you just assume that that is the case, really.
Yeah, exactly. I often say if you are in your 40s, you are perimenopausal, really, whether you know it or not. Those hormones are starting to change. And I don't want to make anybody fearful, because I think there is a lot of fear mongering around this subject. And we need to remember that 1 in 4 women, they breeze through it without any kind of issue whatsoever. And that doesn't really get talked about, because those women won't talk about their positive experiences. But for the majority of women, they do have symptoms. And for, a kind of minority within that majority, if you see what I mean, they are very discombobulating, and they are, sometimes they are life changing.
It's incredible that we're not taught about this as part of the cycle at school. I mean, where's the chat about menopause? Why is that not been spoken about from that age so it's not terrifying? And then, all of this misunderstanding around it. Have you seen that changing at all in your work? That chat at schools and elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, it's maddening, isn't it? It is changing. And actually, in state schools, menopause is now part of the curriculum. So, but that's only since, I don't know, a couple of years ago. And so I'm part of a movement called Menopause Mandate, and they are very much pushing, and working alongside MPs like Carolyn Harris, pushing to get government to recognise and to address this kind of thing. And they are making big moves forward, but I think there's still quite a long way to go. And, there's lots of celebrities kind of jumping on, which is brilliant because it does get that message out to more people. But yeah, we've still got a long way to go, unfortunately.
Yeah, and there's a whole the workplace as well, not just schools, but just understanding around there. When women hit those really senior jobs, it's gonna be then, isn't it? It's gonna be then.
Sorry, just to, go back to that. Every woman goes through menopause, but not every woman goes through pregnancy. But pregnancy it's really well researched. Every workplace environment has a pregnancy or a postpartum type policy, but not every workplace has a menopause policy, unfortunately. So yeah, again, still lots of work to be done.
Just on that, will your menopause be slightly different if you've had kids or not had kids?
I don't think that we have the research to say categorically whether that is true or not. I think if you want to kind of have an idea of how your menopause might look, it's a good idea. And I tell younger women quite often to do this is to talk to your mother. It's not always an indication of what you're going to go through, but to talk to your mother, maybe your aunt, older sister, and see what kind of experience they had, because it might give you some kind of insight into how your experience might be.
See, that's interesting. You'll probably be outraged, but my mother, hi mum, if you're listening, she's still on HRT, age 78, because she's a nurse as well. She's like, I'm not coming off it. I'm just not.
No, I'm not outraged at all. I think that's actually really common. And I know a lot of women who are like, I will go into my coffin with my HRT patch firmly on. It's for life for lots of women. Because lots of women find that it is game changing. It's really beneficial, but it's not for everyone.
No. So thinking about HRT then, can you tell us a little bit about what the current treatment options are for that? What are the benefits? What are the risks, etc., and who can take it and who can't?
Yeah. So I just have to say that obviously I'm not a medically trained doctor, so I'm talking in a very general terms here. But yeah, there are lots of different options, lots of different preparations. There are pills, there are patches, there are sprays, there's gel. I don't know what your mum's using. Do you know?
Pills.
Okay, yeah. And, it's very much a conversation to be had with your GP or a menopause specialist, because there are different types of doses. And some women will find that different preparations work really well for them, some don't. So, for example, patches, some people get on with them brilliantly. They just put them on, they have to change them twice a week. They can kind of forget about them. Whereas for other women, the patch doesn't work because maybe they have a kind of intolerance to the glue that's used on it, and they will find that it peels off, and they're just not absorbing very well. Other people, for example, with the gel, you have to put it on once a day. Some women find that really handy, but obviously some women forget. So it's very much horses for courses. And like I said, the for most women, if you look at any of the kind of global menopause societies, for most women, the benefits outweigh the risks. But it's not for everyone. And there's a real push at the moment on social media by menopause doctors about how HRT is this kind of magical elixir, and for lots of women, yes, it is. It manages their symptoms very well, but it isn't for everybody. And some women will find that it just, they just don't get on with it. I think there is a very much a kind of settling in period. So it may take 3 to 6 months actually to kind of find your dose and to get into that rhythm. But for for lots of women, actually, it just doesn't work for them. They find that they're bloating, they're putting on weight, they get migraines, there's lots of potential side effects. I don't want to diminish its importance because it obviously plays a huge, it's a big part of the puzzle, the menopause puzzle, but it isn't the only part. And I do want women to recognize that there are lots of different options, lots of different strategies out there, and they don't all have to involve hormones. There's lots of different non-hormone type medications that women can take. There's a new one called Vezoa, which is fezolinetant, which is for vasomotor symptoms, for example. So it's quite new. You probably won't get it on the NHS, but you will get it through a private menopause doctor, unfortunately. Now, that will probably change. It's out in the States already and being used, I think, quite widely. But, that is an option potentially for women who cannot use HRT because it's not hormone based.
What is it then?
So it works on these neurokinin pathways in the brain, and it works in the hypothalamus. And I don't know the kind of ins and outs as much as somebody like Jen Gunter. If you are on social media, follow Jen Gunter. She's brilliant at making this kind of information really understandable. And she doesn't fearmonger. So, yeah, she's really good. Anise Mukherjee is another great UK-based menopause specialist. She's very good, particularly if you've been through breast cancer and you want options. She's a great person, very calming, just very pragmatic. I think it's good to have a balance when you are on social media, the kind of information that you are receiving. But there's also for younger women, they can use the contraceptive pill. I think that doesn't get talked about enough. There is CBT, which can be used particularly for things like hot flushes. And it's a particular type of CBT. It's not just any generic CBT. I think you have to find a practitioner who really is well versed in menopause therapy. There are lots of other types of non-hormone prescriptions. So things like antihypertensive drugs, even low dose SSRIs, so low dose antidepressants, can be helpful for women who experience mood changes and also hot flushes. There's lots available.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that about the contraceptive pill because actually that's what I was recommended. But because I'm so aware that there are so few, as you said, so few doctors who specialize in this, GPs particularly, and that it's elective. I wasn't sure whether that was the right advice or not, but I was told not to worry about HRT for now if I was getting on with my pills. So I'm just taking that for the moment.
Okay, yeah.
Um,
And if it's working for you, that's fine. I think, there comes a point, I think it's not recommended for women over the age of 50. But again, it's something that you need to talk about with your GP. And I think that's the issue. Lots of GPs aren't perhaps, very well up to speed with the latest guidance. So it is definitely worthwhile if you're not getting the kind of information and support that you need from your GP, ask for a second opinion. In most GP surgeries, there is a menopause specialist, somebody who has a kind of a special interest in that area. Often, it might be the nurse practitioner. It might not even be a GP. Nurse practitioners are very, very up to date generally, and quite often a good person to ask to speak to. And if not, then you can ask to be referred to a menopause clinic. Now, the waiting times are quite lengthy, unfortunately, but it's definitely something maybe to ask for, and have kind of in the back of your mind so that maybe 6 months goes past and then you can get your appointment further down the line. But yeah, it's a waiting game.
See, it's interesting you say that because it wasn't that long ago that I went to my GP and had like a different one from the lady who just said to carry on with the pill. It wasn't that long ago that I went to my normal GP and said, I think I might be having some symptoms, but I'm not sure. And the response I got was, let's do a blood test, which I know seems a bit crazy, just to see what my blood levels were, literally on that particular day. And on the basis of that answer, I was told that I was fine.
Yeah.
Can we talk about why that's not particularly helpful to go and have one single blood test on one single day?
Yeah, so the Global Society, so like the British Menopause Society, NAMS, which is the North American Menopause Society, they don't recommend hormone blood tests for women over the age of 45 because, like we said at the beginning, your hormones are in this state of flux. So you might have a blood test at 12 noon and it might look very differently to something that you'd have, later, even that day or the next day. So it's not recommended, like I say, for women over the age of 45. If you are under that age, then potentially it can be helpful to diagnose things like early menopause. But usually GPs will do two tests 6 weeks apart to see if there is some kind of correlation and it's not just an anomaly.
Mm. Okay. Maybe it was 2 6 weeks apart, but, I was just sort of told to go away after that, and I didn't feel like there was enough, and I wasn't given any other information about it, so,
I mean,
that's why I'm talking to you now.
yeah, it's a what we call a clinical diagnosis, menopause. So it isn't based, if over the age of 45, it isn't based on any kind of hormone testing. It's based on symptoms. And that's why I think it's really important to track your periods. This is, advice for younger women. Track your periods. If you're in your 40s, then you can start to see even just, slight changes, because they might get slightly shorter, they might get slightly longer, they might get slightly heavier, lighter. Sometimes life is busy and we're not really aware of it. But if you start tracking, you've got that information.
That's a good point. So, checking your periods if you're on the pill, though, you can still notice changes, though, can't you? I mean, I am.
Can you? Yeah. Sometimes they will, kind of come through, even that essentially you're shutting down ovulation when you're taking the pill, right? So a lot of women, when they get to the point where they think they could be perimenopausal, they will come off the pill and see what their periods are doing, and it might take 3 4 months to kind of get back into your normal rhythm. And we need to recognize that actually HRT is a lower dose of hormones than most contraceptive pills. So lots of women, lots of GPs will argue that actually it's safer. So that is something again to have in the back of your mind. It's a very much a conversation to be had with a medical practitioner.
I would have thought it'd be the opposite.
I know.
HRT stronger.
No.
Interesting.
Especially low dose. Obviously you can build up your dose with HRT.
Okay. So, one question I have been asked to ask you is if you are on HRT, whether that's the gels or the patches, like traditional HRT, shall we say, and I know it does vary. Are there any supplements that you could take around that will help things, or will they get in the way? Things that are quite on trend now, things like ashwagandha or maybe lion's mane, all these, the functional mushrooms, etc. Is there anything that can sort of really live happily with it, or some things we should avoid?
So yeah, let's talk about the things to avoid. I think there's this kind of appeal to nature whereby herbs and supplements are seen to be natural. Therefore, you can take them willy-nilly, and they are not going to cause any problems. But actually, particularly when it comes to herbs, they can be really quite potent. And lots of our modern medications are based on herbs, right? If you are taking any kind of herbal supplement, so things like the ones that come up a lot are red clover, black cohosh, things like St. John's wort, particularly for depression and mood symptoms, they can interact with HRT, particularly things like St. John's wort can interact with all sorts of medications. So work with a registered herbalist, seek one out. There is a body of accredited herbalists that you can find online. And yeah, don't be too gung-ho about just going in willy-nilly. You really need to be thinking about these things, the potential contraindications. There are things like, as well, high doses. There's a real kind of tendency, isn't there, for more is more, well, I've heard that vitamin C is good, so let's go, and do these mega doses. But very high levels of B6, very high levels of vitamin C have been shown to potentially contraindicate when it comes to the actual synthesizing of estrogen. So, these are things to bear in mind. And actually, a good place to start, if you are, if you can't get to see a herbalist, is talking to your local pharmacist, in your local chemist, because they are a source of really good information when it comes to, drug contraindications.
Okay, so it's good to know a couple of things to potentially avoid and to get advice on that. But is there anything that you would recommend to take?
Yeah. So, first of all, let's go back. And at this time, particularly for younger women, but it doesn't matter what age you are, I think it's really handy to do what I call a kind of health audit. And I talk about this in my book, which is The Perimenopause Solution, which is great for younger women. That's why I wrote it, so that women don't feel like they're getting to that point where they can no longer cope. They're almost kind of preempting what's about to happen. So a health audit is essentially going to your GP. All of these tests can be done, most of them anyway, can be done for free with your GP, and getting things like your vitamin D, your folate, your B12, your thyroid, your iron, and your HbA1c, which is your blood glucose, your average blood glucose over the last 90 days. and also blood pressure. So getting those tested, I think, puts women, it makes them feel more in control, and they've got the numbers. They know exactly where they are. Ask your GP to physically give you those results, because quite often they will say, oh, when it comes to iron, you're in range, but the range is big, right? The
Mm.
laboratory range, it spans a big range. And so what happens is quite often you can be what we call suboptimal. So you can be quite low down in that range, and therefore not firing on all cylinders and not feeling your best. Whereas if we got you further up, higher in that range, actually women start to kind of feel like they're coming back to life. And the reason I say this is that a lot of what those tests that I've just mentioned, actually, when you're deficient in them, or when they are kind of slightly off kilter, they can cause symptoms and side effects which very much mimic perimenopause. And so, particularly things like thyroid and low iron, yeah, they can, things like weight gain, hair shedding, itchy skin, fatigue, anxiety, and lots of those obviously cross over with the kind of symptoms that women are coming in to see me about in clinic every day. So that is a really good starting point, I think, for women to to go in and start that conversation rolling, and you feel a little bit more in control. And I think this time of life is very much about taking back control.
Yes. So you would get those results and then you'd come to someone like you, because I guess there's not much point in discussing them with a GP who's not a specialist.
But some are really brilliant. I think we have to be careful. I have to be careful. All of us have to be careful not to bash GPs. They're doing a brilliant job, and I think a lot of them, obviously, if you're low in iron, they can talk to you about that. But yeah, usually the first thing that I do when I start working with a woman, so getting those ranges up, getting you into kind of an optimal place can pay massive dividends. And so, to go on from your original question, I think it's really helpful to think about, all of us should be taking vitamin D in the UK anyway, especially between March and October. We're heading into autumn, is definitely something to think about. Have that in the back of your mind. You're looking at a particular type of vitamin D, so D3. Ideally, you would take it, if you don't have any kind of blood clotting disorders, you would take it with a vitamin K2. And very often brands will put those two together because it's really easy to take. So that's really helpful for things like muscle aches, for bone health, for immunity, and even things like mood. So vitamin D is, it's a real kind of a basic that I think everybody should know what their levels are, because some people will actually need to take it throughout the year, not just in the winter months. Depends on your skin tone, how often you go outside, etc., etc. I think if you're not eating 2 portions of oily fish a week, which lots of us, particularly in the UK, aren't, so things like mackerel, sardines, anchovies, those kind of things, salmon, then you need to be taking a DHA and EPA, which comes under the umbrella of omega-3. So usually it's a fish oil, but you can also get, for vegans, you can get it in an algae oil variety. I think creatine is brilliant for women, all women, doesn't matter how old you are, whether you're, I think there's this kind of association with bodybuilding and creatine, but actually more and more research is done, not just on stamina and performance in the gym, but also on cognition. And, lots of women will complain about brain fog at this time of life. So creatine, 3 to 5 milligrams a day, just put it into water, doesn't taste of anything, maybe slightly chalky. I think that's something to look at. Creatine monohydrate, very cheap, you buy it in bulk. And then potentially magnesium can be really helpful. Lots of women are low in magnesium. You get it from green leafy vegetables, from whole grains, from avocados, bananas, those kinds of things. But there's a kind of question mark over whether it is that present in foods these days with modern, farming methods. So I do see, just even anecdotally, lots of women really benefit from taking 300 to 400 milligrams before bed. It can help with sleep. So magnesium glycinate is just magnesium, which is attached to a glycine molecule. So that can be exceptionally helpful for sleep, for anxiety, for restless legs. Lots of women will complain of restless legs at this time of life. Lots of women may find that they are constipated. things start to really kind of slow down. Estrogen is really helpful for kind of pushing food through our gastrointestinal tract. So magnesium citrate can be very helpful if you are constipated. So again, having it just before bed, and then quite often it can bring on a really nice bowel movement in the morning, which I know a lot of women are like, hallelujah, I'm feeling really bunged up and this is really getting me moving. So, great for that. And then my last one would be, and obviously I have to caveat this with, this is general, very general advice. It's not individual advice, but I do see a lot of women benefiting from a B complex. So that's all 8 B vitamins in one capsule, and that can actually helps your body to synthesize hormones, but also to extract the goodness and the nutrients and the energy from food. So that they are kind of the ones that I often talk about. Yeah.
So it's kind of matching the symptoms to the supplement almost, rather than just having one big,
Well, I
one
have to
single thing.
admit, Helena, I am very conservative when it comes to supplements. I think there is a real overemphasis at the moment, and menopause is a hot topic. People are recognizing that women are very vulnerable at this time. They have quite often got a fair bit of disposable income because they've reached that kind of time of life. And I think there's some very clever marketing going on. So I do see a lot of women with literally bottles and bottles of supplements that are potentially contraindicating, working against each other, just very expensive, a lot of hype. So yeah, I am kind of conservative. I do think it's definitely something to kind of individualize and to personalize and to talk to a practitioner about.
It sounds like that because with that list, I'm like, I want that, I want that, I want that, I want that. But maybe let's see what my body needs. An obvious one, I think, is what might we have been doing for most of our lives that we really should maybe look at doing a lot less. Things like drinking alcohol, for example. I mean, obviously, smoking is bad anyway. Are there more things that are less obvious that we should think about cutting down or doing more of?
Yeah, smoking is the obvious one. And actually, smokers have been shown to go through menopause earlier. So it's definitely something to really try to kind of work on. Yeah, alcohol doesn't really, the research is kind of pointing towards the fact that there is no safe limit for, safe amount of alcohol. But we have to be realistic, right? I mean, I really enjoy, a glass of wine with my mates. So I think there is the kind of social side of things, which again doesn't really get talked about. The community, the offloading, the venting, getting women together, that social aspect that women are actually very good at, I think, should be bigged up. But yeah, if you are relying on alcohol to kind of as a crutch to get you through, it's definitely worth trying to come up with alternatives. We know that unfortunately it makes so many symptoms worse, and it really affects sleep. It can really impact weight, appetite. We know that if you're hungover, or even if you've had just a couple of glasses of wine, quite often women feel much hungrier the next day, and even the day after that, 300 to 500 calories, in fact.
I am really into all the alternatives and seeing what's on the market at the moment. Especially this year, it's been my big thing to trying to seek out the no and low, the like more the functional
Yeah.
alternatives that aren't going to do you any harm and actually might give you something else. But I think alcohol, especially for women our age, a lot of like, and for me and my friends, it's a very important conversation to have.
It
Um,
has to be, I think it
because
has to be selective, right? It's like if you are going to enjoy it, enjoy it. But it's almost like just know that you probably won't sleep that well that night, and the next day, you might be have night sweats and flushes and things like, and increased palpitations, potentially anxiety. So it's just about weighing everything up, isn't it?
I know it's ridiculous that you can still choose, as I do, to have that glass or two when I know that I'll be up at 3:30 with a pounding
Yeah,
heart and the self-loathing and the anxiety for 48 hours afterwards. I still do it.
yeah,
I mean, it's bizarre, isn't it?
me too.
Goodness me. Okay, well
I'm
that
not
makes me feel a
perfect,
little
far from it.
better. Quite
There's
frankly.
also, there's more research coming out now as well, particularly if you are, and lots of women find that their blood balance, their blood glucose regulation ability kind of goes a little bit off kilter as they go through menopause. So essentially, you become slightly more insulin resistant. Not everyone, but some women. And if that is you, or if you are, pre type 2 diabetic, then actually front loading your day, the research is kind of coming out now, front loading your day. So not skipping breakfast, but actually eating most of your carbohydrate rich meals at the beginning of the day has actually been shown to be potentially helpful.
Okay. And if you are in that category, is it better, as some people say, do you think, to have something that's like fermented about 20 minutes beforehand? So maybe some Greek yogurt, some lots of live yogurt, or some kimchi, or some apple cider vinegar, etc. Does that help as well? Especially if you're gonna have a load of carbs after?
Oh, so yeah, like the glucose goddess has kind of made this food ordering very trendy. And there is, yeah, I do see a lot of women kind of downing these shots of apple cider vinegar. I think again, it's over extrapolated, but potentially, particularly with apple cider vinegar, it has been shown to delay that postprandial, so after eating, kind of blood glucose rise. So for anyone who is insulin resistant, it could potentially help, but you don't need to take shots of it. Have it on a sort of, a nice green salad, and then have your meal. I mean, I think that could potentially help, but you don't. I see lots of women who are they become almost kind of obsessive about things. And I think that obsession is just not very helpful all the time. And there's a real rise actually in eating disorders around this time. I see a lot of women who are restricting, taking out food groups, depriving themselves. And actually, this is very much not the time to be doing that. I think we need to be talking more about including, the foods to include rather than exclude. So we need to be, like you said, fermented foods could be really helpful, great potentially for bolstering your gut microbiome. So really good for gut health. We need more protein. I'm always talking about protein. If you want more information, come onto my Instagram page because it's all I talk about. Fiber. We need more fiber from plant foods. So I would say half your plate ideally should be made up of plant foods. So fiber actually feeds those gut microbes in your lower intestine. And we know now that it's almost like a little apothecary in there, that they are producing all of these chemicals that then talk to the rest of our body and have these beneficial impacts on hormones, things like appetite, even things like mood, like happiness levels. We need potentially something else that we could kind of touch on is phytoestrogens at this time. The research isn't conclusive, but for 50% of the women who were part of a study that I'm thinking of, adding in phytoestrogens actually helped to minimize the severity and the frequency of hot flushes, for example. So phytoestrogens are found in soya products, so things like tofu, but also in plant foods, so particularly legumes and things like flax. So ground flax seeds is another really good example or a source of phytoestrogen foods. And, for 50% of women, they might help. For 50% they won't, but they also have other benefits. So tofu and soya foods are helpful potentially for lowering cholesterol. They are filling, they are complete proteins. The flax seeds and the legumes that I was talking about are really good sources of fiber. So there's benefits to those foods, definitely, whether they reduce your vasomotor symptoms or not.
Have you come across a good book with recipes for this, with all of these things in, anywhere that you would recommend?
No, to be honest with you, I haven't. There are a lot of menopause kitchen, menopause recipes, but nothing at the moment that kind of helps you to reach these targets that I'm talking about. And another thing that is quite important to mention before I forget is calcium. Calcium is incredibly important for bone health. And we know that, post 50, we are really kind of prone to fracture and osteopenia and osteoporosis, which is that, the brittle bones and the easy kind of breaking of bones. So really thinking about your calcium intake. And if, I don't want to kind of bamboozle women with numbers, but when you're under the age of 50, you need 700 milligrams a day. When you're over 50, it almost doubles. You need 1200 milligrams. So it is definitely something to think about. And you can get calcium from, not just from dairy, which is the obvious one, but, sardines, all those kind of fish with small bones, things like pilchards, but also green leafy vegetables, broccoli, figs, oranges, white beans. All of these are really good sources of calcium, and enriched non-dairy plant milks, so things like oat milk, for example. You just need to make sure that you check the label, because organic plant milks aren't able to be fortified, non-organic is. So yeah, to answer your question, there isn't. I'm being absolutely honest with you, I can't think of anything really that ticks all those boxes, but I am working on something. So watch this space.
This is a very good time for people to hear how to find you. So, what is your Instagram handle where we can get more of these tips? Tell us about your books and also your practice.
Yeah, so I mostly hang out on Instagram at emma.bardwell. You can check out my website, which is emmabardwell.com. My book is The Perimenopause Solution, and I've written it with a menopause doctor so that we can talk about HRT, non-HRT medications. It talks about menopause in the workplace, sleep, diet, weight management, mental health. It goes through everything, and it's as relevant to postmenopausal women as it is to perimenopausal women, really. But like I mentioned earlier, I really want to get to women before they feel like they are, floundering and they're on the floor. Yeah. And I also have, if anybody is thinking, well, yeah, how do I translate all of this info actually into meals on a plate? I have currently got something called the 30-gram plan, which is a 2-week meal guide, which is high fiber, high protein, really, really simple dishes that you can throw together. Lots of batch cooking. It's dead simple. It's not cordon bleu by any stretch. I am not a good chefy type person, and we're all really busy. I just want to make it really practical for women. So again, that is something to look out for potentially.
And your clinic, right?
Yes, you can find me via emmabardwell.com. Yeah, all the info is on there.
One thing we haven't talked about with this time of life is sexual health. So, is there anything you would say that women can do to address this concern?
Yes, definitely. And this is probably, for women who've been through breast cancer, I think their ears will prick up, because um, one of the side effects of going through chemotherapy is potentially being thrust into menopause, almost overnight sometimes, particularly if it's surgical menopause. So essentially having your ovaries removed. And what can happen is that we experience dryness everywhere, dry eyes. Women will get itchy ears because of the dryness. It's almost like your ears are kind of drying up. It's for lots of women, they describe it as almost they're drying up from the inside out, and it can affect your vaginal and vulval health. So there are lots of different ways that you can approach this, but vaginal estrogen, which is not systemic, i.e. it is isolated to, that's not the right word, but it's isolated to your pelvic area. And so because it doesn't affect your blood levels of estrogen, women who have been through breast cancer treatment, very often, most of them can use vaginal estrogen, and it comes in the form of pessaries and cream, and it can be an absolute game changer. And for women who are potentially getting up loads in the night to wee, for women who are experiencing maybe painful penetrative intercourse, this can be a game changer, because it actually helps to plump up those tissues that essentially, for want of a better word, potentially atrophying, and becoming much thinner, much more prone to injury, much drier. Some women I've spoken to find it really hard to kind of wear jeans or ride a bike, for example. And that is something that really should not be tolerated. And it's actually quite a quick fix. So that's definitely something that I would recommend talking to your GP about. And actually, just one other thing while I'm talking about this kind of area is pelvic floor health. Get to see a women's health physio if you can. It's one of the best things I think I've done. Lots of women might be experiencing things like a mild prolapse at this time, that kind of dragging sort of sensation. Again, they might be having urinary incontinence, and talking to a women's health physio and just making sure that you are doing the exercises correctly. And you can turn these symptoms around fairly easily. It might take a while, but it is possible.
Gosh, all these things. It's
I know. There's a
And
lot, isn't it? And I think it can feel very overwhelming. I think what I tell women to do is to prioritize. You can't overhaul your diet. You can't do all of these lifestyle changes at once. Prioritize, list things in order of importance, and just go through them one by one.
start early, I guess, before you even think you need to worry about it, get things into your routine. This has been absolutely packed full of gold, and I'm sure there's more we could talk about, Emma, but really, for now, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure. Lovely to see you.
So, what do you make of that?
I'm actually in shock that all of this centers around what actually is just certified and what happens on one day.
Yeah, one day that you know about a year later.
Yeah, you don't even know that one day is the one day. And obviously, it's not just about the one day, it's leading up to it and everything and all the symptoms that, go with it because you are changing. But that is, I've done a lot of research on menopause and I just didn't really know that one fact. I love it.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people do actually. They think it's just something that happens to you when you're a lot older, um, not like the whole 15 years leading up to it.
Yeah. Um, it had a bad rap, didn't it? Like, just meant, menopause was almost a bit of a slur, like, oh, it's like, oh, you're on your period, or oh, she's menopause, or like the whole Shirley Valentine kind of era. That I feel like that is my one experience of understanding it growing up was just the Shirley Valentine just having a meltdown and going and shagging a younger man in Italy. Where does she go?
What, like a midlife crisis? Yeah.
Yeah.
God, see, mine's deep rooted and really evil. I've just, in my mind, it means like, well, your best years are behind you. You're done. You're not going to add anything more to society, and you're not going to get any work, especially if it's based on looks.
Yeah, totally. That's what I've thought as well, which is why I will share with our listeners. It's quite timely. What was it? When was it? A couple of months ago, I was diagnosed with early menopause. Managed to circumvent the old peri and go straight to meno. Thanks, body. But have done a complete 180 and are actually really grateful because it completely explained some horrendous symptoms I've been having for well over a year.
Oh my God, that's great.
Yeah, no, it is. Well, I spoke to you, didn't I? You're my sister at the time. And I was like, oh my God, my youngest hasn't even started school and my life's over. And I genuinely felt that way for a bit. But then I woke up and I'm kind of grateful that my symptoms and my results of my estrogen levels were so significantly obvious that there was no messing about. They've just put me on HRT. So I'm 11 days in. I'm so fortunate to live in a country where I have access to it. So this is a very timely podcast for me. The biggest takeaway from this is that there is just no one experience. There is no one solution, is there? It's a trial and error thing. There's not enough research. And it's because we're all so unique that
Yeah.
you can't just pinpoint this is when it will happen. That's what you need. But that's why these kind of conversations are great.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I took a lot of comfort from the simplicity in some ways. Yes, I know there's a lot of information in that chat, but the simplicity of, look, dudettes from 40, probably, sometimes a bit before, things will start to change, period. Lol. Haha, see what I did there. So basically, you just got to check your nutrition, check your exercise, just be mindful of any symptoms you might be having and try and future proof it by eating well and just getting a little bit of strength training in there. And if symptoms get worse, then go and see a specialist, maybe not a GP at the moment.
Yes. Once again, I mean, we've talked about how the NHS is under pressure and absolutely not slagging it off, not slagging off GPs. But in my experience, yeah, go to a specialist or like Emma mentions, the practitioner nurse in
Yeah.
your surgery, because that's actually where I ended up. And she was just really black and white, but really personable with me. So there are people out there. And because you and I have both had quite a bad experience with GPs, haven't we? In terms of, you mentioned it in the interview that you were kind of just told, no, you're fine.
Well, I think that's just it. There's just hasn't been enough sort of specialism for GPs in this, for very, very good reasons. But the big thing is, I was worried about this a few years ago, and I came and had a blood test. I think I had two blood tests, but and they just sort of checked my hormone levels, and they're like, "Oh, no, 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 fine, you've got plenty of time." When it's so much more nuanced than that, and we know that our hormones can change several times a day, our levels, let alone just, let alone in the course of over the course of 2 weeks. So basically, what I'm trying to say is our hormone levels might be completely different an hour after we took them.
Yes, exactly. There's another person that's really amazing to follow who complements what Emma talks about. She's quite the big name in menopause, Dr. Louise Newson. She's a gold mine of info and obviously comes from a very scientific medical explanation of everything. So it really gets to the nitty gritty of what is happening in your body and why something that's happening in your ovaries is affecting your brain so much, because it's such a, it's a holistic system, your body, and if you're depleted of one thing. And another thing, I think her husband is a surgeon or something.
Hmm.
Or, they're both very esteemed in medicine. They have an argument about whether HRT is medicine or not.
Yeah.
Because I kind of think, no, I feel like it's replacing something that's depleting.
I think it's more of a supplement because you're just putting back into your body what you've lost and what your body's not producing anymore. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. It's a supplement.
Yeah. Well, that's what's made me feel better about taking it, because, the idea of being medicated for potentially the rest of your life seems a bit daunting, but, is it medicated? But again, it's because it affects every single woman. It is really important to just have a word with yourself and ask yourself those questions like, how do I feel about that? Do I want to be medicated? Do I want to soldier on? Do I want to explore all the alternatives? I would never ever suggest or recommend something to anyone like that. Like, obviously I don't know yet because I haven't really had the full impact of my HRT. But I really want to make a point of not saying you should do that because I feel better, because that's just ridiculous.
Mm.
I do feel like a generation of women have been, for want of a better word, gaslit about the perils of HRT as well. And so if you're in any way nervous, you're just going to, avoid, aren't you? Because it was linked with breast cancer and, blood pressure issues. But it's actually been proven that it's preventative. It helps massively with bones and, stopping osteoporosis. It's amazing for your heart health and for your brain. It's really good for your health long term. So it's good to shout about that as well, because people would have heard, the negative press about it, which again has sort of been debunked.
I hadn't even heard that negative press, if I'm honest. I had no idea about that. But then I haven't had reason yet to dive deep into whether I have HRT or not. So that could also be why. But still, it's great that that has been debunked. And I think they say a lot about the like being on the contraceptive pill as well. Like these days, the levels have been looked at so much that they're not dangerous like they used to be. And if you get the right one, you can be on it for a very long time.
Yeah. And like you mentioned in the interview, HRT at the starting dosage isn't as strong as the normal contraceptive pill anyway.
Well, exactly. Yes. I mean, my doctor, I know I said this in the interview, but the specialist I spoke to said, just look, if you're just in the pill and it suits you, just stay on it. You may as well. It suits you.
Mm.
So I will stay on that until someone really kicks me off it. Well, perhaps before it gets too personal, we should say to people, go and seek out some advice on nutrition and all the stats for yourself and see how you feel about where you are in your journey.
Yeah. Plus, it's really important, and she mentions this at the beginning of the interview. It's really important to remember this isn't a doom and gloom for everyone. We are not all destined to be walking up to this bloody cave we have to then go and like find our way out of. One she mentions 1 in 4 women just absolutely breeze it and don't even notice it. So this doesn't have to be the harbinger of doom. It doesn't have to be something to dread, especially nowadays when we've got this information. It is just pay attention to yourself and realize it's a thing, it's natural, but it's treatable in, emotionally and physically.
And talk to your friends about it. I'm finding that's really helpful actually because it just sort of demystifies it and destigmatizes it. Well, this has just been a foot in the door here, but there are lots of podcasts out there totally dedicated to this. And do, of course, follow specialists like wonderful Emma Bardwell. Thank you for joining us, Emma. You can follow her, remember, on Instagram at emma.bardwell and on her website, emmabardwell.com.
And be sure to follow us at Flock and Hive on all the socials. And we have the website at bookandhive.com.
Thank you once again so much for listening. We are really appreciative of your support. And until next time, bye-bye.
Bye.